Hello everyone, my name is Heloise Ramage-Hayes. I was an assistant legal officer for an employment and now I'm a volunteer advocate.
My name's Helen. I am one of the assistant legal officers at FRU along with Daniel, who is sort of my counterpart, and we do both employment and social security law.
So it's really exciting to actually be in front of people after such a long time dealing with everyone virtually. Today we're going to talk to you a bit about what FRU is, what we do, why you might want to volunteer with us, and finally, how you can get involved.
So first up, who has heard of FRU or the Free Representation Unit before? A good few of you, okay. Well, FRU has been providing representation for social security law and employment law in their tribunals since 1972, so we're celebrating our 50th anniversary next year, which is amazing. And FRU helps people who can't afford lawyers and also aren't eligible for legal aid. So our work is done by volunteers, mostly law students like yourselves, and some legal professionals in the early stages of their career. We have a very small team, there's about 7 of us in the office, but ultimately what law students get to do is run and organise cases themselves. We give you a lot of responsibility, but don't worry, all FRU's representatives are trained and supervised by legal officers like myself or Daniel, or you might have heard of Emma and Michael, who are principal legal officers. At the start of each case, you'll do something called a ratification. So you'll speak to us about what the case is about, what the issues are, talk it through with us. We'll work out if it's for you, if you're available, etc. And then every piece of work you do will be checked as well.
So what areas of law do we do? There are 2 main areas, employment and social security. So in both, you as the volunteer would be responsible for case preparation and representing the client at the tribunal as well. If the case is unsuccessful or partially unsuccessful, you would also be there to consider appeal and possibly then represent the client at appeal as well. In terms of the complexity of the cases, we have to grade both employment and social security, but when you start off, you'd be looking at what we call any rep cases. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about employment specifically. With employment, an any rep case is probably going to be something like unfair dismissal or unlawful deduction of wages. And just to take a step back, you might be thinking, what exactly does that mean? So all employment cases that FRU deal with have been brought by claimants against their ex-employer or their current employer. And unfair dismissal is, I've been sacked and I shouldn't have been, in most basic terms. And unlawful deduction of wages is, I should have been paid and I haven't. And broadly speaking, an any rep case is going to be something along those lines. If you're able to volunteer with us for longer, you can move on to more complex cases, so that might be automatic unfair dismissal involving whistleblowing, or it might mean discrimination or equal pay. So I think very briefly, in terms of some characteristics of an employment tribunal case, the hearing will probably be, the range that you'd be looking at would be between a couple of hours to 3 days. Obviously, actual employment hearings can go on for longer than that, but that's just the range that you'd be looking at. In terms of the commitment for you, I would say that on your first employment case, where you're not working on it every day, but you are working on it regularly, you need 4 to 6 weeks. If you're working full time, you would need longer than that, maybe a couple of months to prepare, because it is a lot of commitment, it is a lot of work. And then you also need a bit of a window after the hearing, because you need to be sure that you are able to consider appeal and help a client apply for appeal as well. So it's a fairly substantial commitment, but it is really interesting, really valuable. The hearing itself, the tribunal panel will probably just be one judge sitting alone. You might, in more complex cases, have 3 panel members, 2 lay members, 1 judge. Yes, so one other aspect is that your opponent is going to be someone you're communicating with regularly. They are probably going to be represented, though not necessarily, and so that could mean being against a solicitor or a barrister. And then I think the last point is that with employment cases, it's very much leaning towards the structure of a civil case, like in the county court or any other kind of civil jurisdiction case. Get an opportunity to do redirect, cross-examination, and present oral submissions. So it's really interesting way of getting to put your skills into practice.
Yeah. So social security law, it's slightly different in the sense that it's about welfare benefits. So a lot of people might have heard of universal credit. There's something called personal independent payment, and there's also something called employment support allowance. What you're doing in social security law is usually it's a case where somebody has benefits, but it's either their application to receive benefits has been rejected, or it's been partially successful, but they need a bit more to get them over the threshold of being eligible. That's sort of the cases you'll do if you're starting on your feet at through, and if you sort of got a little bit more experience, there's cases that involve overpayment of benefits and underpayments of benefits, and it can get quite interesting as well at that point. In social security tribunals, you're in something called the first tier tribunal, and the hearing lengths are generally about half a day to a day. On the panel might be a judge, a doctor, and a disability specialist. Sometimes it's just a judge. And your opposition is the DWP, so it's the state. It's not sort of an individual or a company like you'd find in employment cases. And for that reason, you don't really communicate with them. You're sort of dealing with the tribunal. The tribunal will send out any evidence or information and not mediate between you two, but sort of be the correspondence between the two of you. If the DWP are going to be at the tribunal, there'll be someone called a presenting officer, so it's not going to be Priti Patel sat next to you, but it will be a presenting officer, and they sort of put forward the state's case, effectively. What you do in social security law is sort of a lot of behind the scenes is the important bit. So you're working on written submissions. So you're analysing your client's case, their medical condition and the medical evidence, and you're applying it to the law. So each sort of disability benefit has a descriptor, it's called. There's tables that you go through, and you're seeing sort of where they fit in each one and presenting a case. You're writing submissions to hand to the tribunal beforehand, and that is so, so important, because what you're doing is persuading the tribunal before you're even in the hearing as to what they should think or what they should conclude. That is a really underestimated skill that is a really important skill for a barrister, but not many people realise how important, because you're effectively writing how you want the tribunal to follow, how you want them to structure their questions, and what you ultimately want them to conclude at the end of it. Commitment for social security is a little bit less than employment law because it's a bit more contained, the issues within it. So we may be asked for about 3 weeks alongside the other things that you're doing, but sometimes hearings can pop up urgently, so you might only have 2 weeks until the hearing. So it allows for some flexibility, but you've also kind of got to be able to put a lot forward into it if it's an urgent case, for example.
So I think the key point there is that both of the areas of law are really interesting, and the experience in both cases is really valuable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why you'd want to volunteer with us. And a couple of reasons I want to talk to you about. They're kind of interrelated. So the first is legal skills and experience that you will develop. So firstly, it helps you to decide if you actually want to be a barrister. And secondly, it helps you begin to develop those skills that you will put into practice. So just very quickly, I'm guessing from the fact that you're at a pupillage fair that you're interested in being barristers, but how many of you have decided this is definitely what you want to do? Can I see a show of hands? Oh, right, that's most of you, that's good. Is there anyone who's still feeling undecided? Okay, well this may help you. Is anybody currently doing the BPTC? No, great. Okay, so I know where we are, so this is all to come for you. So as I say, there's a legal skills and experience, and then the other point is that when you are making your pupillage applications, this kind of experience is something that shows that you have an interest in the law. It gives you something to draw on when you're answering questions like why you think you'd make a good barrister. And of course, finally, what is a pupillage application form but a form of written advocacy? What you are doing is putting your best case forward. And so it helps you develop the skills that are useful for that too. So I asked about the BPTC. So when you're on the BPTC, you will study and you will be examined on conference drafting, advocacy skills, and opinion writing. But there is this big difference between learning about something in theory and actually dealing with it in practice, it just sort of clicks for you. You might have a case where this actually happened to me on my first case. I was sitting there and my client was speaking. She said something that, the kind of thing where you're expected to say, yes, I know what you're talking about. And so I just nodded once, and then I thought, no, I shouldn't have done that. And I immediately remembered the relevant lecture where you're not allowed to communicate with your client when they are giving their evidence. This is a kind of example of how things just click for you in practice. It's obviously a little embarrassing, but we all learn as we go along. And so I think that's probably the key point that I want you to take away, which I obviously go into a bit more detail, but the key point is the practice of it is something that you can't really get anywhere else, and you can see all of the sort of realities and unpredictabilities of dealing with an actual person on a real life case where this is actually going to affect someone's life. So in terms of the skills, I'm going to divide it into 3 categories. Case preparation. You learn about legal research. It's an ongoing thing. You're having to come back to the facts and then look into the law again. Bundles, needing to develop your organisation skills, your attention to detail. There might be things in the bundle that shouldn't be there, or you might be making it yourself and needing to think, what else do we need? Then there are your drafting skills. The importance of being clear and concise and persuasive is, as Helen was saying, so important, and in practice you can see the effect that it has. There's nothing quite like hearing a judge repeat bits of your skeleton argument back to you. You would learn to draft witness statements, schedules of loss, a list of issues on an employment case, but in both cases you'll also be advising your client and presenting those submissions where it all comes together. And I think about the advice, it teaches you about the different audiences that you need to deal with, making it digestible for an ordinary person, making it, demonstrating that you actually have identified the relevant law for the tribunal. And then obviously the second thing is hearings. That is the goal, to go to the hearing. And at that point, you see very much everything coming together, the effect of all of your case preparation, having to deal with your client in quite a difficult, emotionally charged situation, dealing with the unpredictabilities of what the judge might ask or what the witnesses will say, watching your client sink the case by saying something like, well, maybe that wasn't why they sacked me, or watching the respondent give something away and thinking, I can build on that. So from that you learn attention to detail, thinking on your feet, and I think picking up on those communication things with the respondent and the tribunal. And the other important aspect, of course, is client handling. Your conference, your first client might be a little withdrawn. You need to draw them out. You need to get the relevant information. They might be very chatty. Make them feel that they are being listened to, but get to the relevant points as well. Throughout, needing to build the confidence in the relationship, maybe having to deal with language barriers and disabilities, having sometimes, especially on social security, to answer such sensitive questions in the most tactful way that you can. And perhaps having to advise them on settlement, and then at that point you're thinking, take the money, or you're thinking, oh, I want to go to tribunal with this, but needing to take a step back, not get too involved. It's the client's decision. You're representing them. And I think it's just one of the most valuable experiences. I think I've probably already said that, but it's so exciting and can be a bit scary, but it's also the most fascinating of legal experiences that you can have.
And there's some personal skills that you sort of can get out of that as well, I think, just sort of softer skills.
Yes, very much so. You can increase your self-confidence. As I said, you can build on organisation, but time management, reading documents efficiently and carefully. And, ultimately, those are the skills that help you develop to be the best barrister you can be and to persuade somebody that that is exactly who you are.
And on top of that, there's that sort of potentially selfish reason for wanting to do pro bono work, but there's also the selfless reason. Ultimately, we exist as a charity to help people where there's so much unmet legal need out there. So many people who are litigants in person, trying to navigate the legal system, have no idea what is a regulation or a statute or anything like that. And so the fact that you can represent them, can make a life-altering difference to somebody, is a really important part of pro bono work. It's rewarding for you, but it's also rewarding for them even if their case settles, for example, they've had adequate representation to help them understand why an employment case has settled or why they've only received a certain amount of benefits. And it's just, it goes without saying how important that is. A little bit on how we're working now. So we are remote, and we have been. So Heloise sort of was with Fru when it was total lockdown and working from home.
Yeah, interesting experience that.
Yes, I was with Fru volunteering sort of pre-COVID when I was going into the office as a volunteer and sort of helping out on cases. And at the moment we're still remote, potentially opening up soon, but with sort of restrictions, we're looking into that. So case papers are all viewed at home online, so electronically. That'll be through a secure system that we've got. And the hearings are sometimes virtual as well at this point. So although saying that, my 2 this week were in person, which was slightly new and fun, but they were in person. So I think it's sort of heading to a hybrid of some remote and some in person. And a lot of the ratifications we've been doing, so discussions with the volunteers, have all been through Teams or online as well at the moment.
Go on. Talk a little bit about how they can get involved.
Exactly. I hope you're all willing to jump on board.
Definitely. So I think the starting point is to go to our website, which is
www.thefru.org.uk.
And finding the part about volunteering. You need to first check that you are eligible. Generally speaking, if you are in your final year of your law degree, you're on the GDL, on the BPTC, if I remember correctly, all of those are examples where you could volunteer, although you really do have to be on the BPTC to do employment law cases. You can sign up for an alert for our training days. That will let you know when they're coming up. We hold them generally in spring, summer and autumn. At the moment, they're mostly remote.
Yes, the one that we've just done recently, it was over a week, every evening for an hour for a week, all done online.
Each individual training course, because previously it was a day, but as Helen says, now it can be over a few days, would be £50. So if you wanted to do both, it would come to £100, but you obviously don't have to do that. You can pick one and then decide that you might look at employment or social security later. So at the training day, you will learn a bit more about case preparation and advocacy, and you will learn about the particular area of law that you're interested in. There will be a test. If you want to have a look what that might be like, there's a sample online. Do you want to talk a bit about the test?
Just that it's quite an important part of what Fru does. It will be, I think this time we offered people 10 days to complete it. Obviously it won't take you 10 days, but with that flexibility to complete the test, we give you sort of everything you need, all the statute you need in that particular test, and then give you sort of a factual scenario, and you'll work through it. It sort of bounces you around the statute, so C53 and then from here now see section 8, and you're sort of bouncing around until you come to a conclusion. But it's a really important way to test your skills and see sort of whether you're ready to join through at that point.
Yes, if you pass the test, and if you don't pass, there is another opportunity to take it, but if you do pass, the next stage is signing up for an office induction. And before you go to a hearing, as I'm sure you can understand, you'd certainly want to observe a hearing and see what it's actually going to be like. I won't go into too much detail about that. It's something you would hear more about on the training day, but essentially you would need to, particularly with Social Security, ask permission to go and attend, and with employment it's more about letting them know that you'd like to, because they are public hearings.
Yes, and I found that really helpful before stepping in on my own to see it, how it happened in real life before I got involved.
Definitely.
And that's sort of how to get involved, really. So we hope this has been really inspiring to volunteer with us. You're not only building skills for yourself, but you're also helping a lot of people who really need that legal representation at the same time. So thank you.